دكتور خليل تحدث إلي الفريق التقني.
Dr. Khalil, the technical team spoke to me and they said that it is possible for you to start the session now.
Recording in progress.
سميحة إذا ممكن تخليني co-host please.
Samih, if you could please make me a co-host.
تفضل دكتور خليل.
Go ahead, Dr. Khalil.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. خليل جهشان من المركز العربي.
Peace be upon you. I am Khalil Jahshan from the Arab Center in Washington, D.C. I welcome you all to the second day of this academic conference on the conflict in Yemen.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Khalil Jahshan from Arab Center, Washington, D.C. I would like to welcome you to day two of our two-day conference dealing with the conflict in Yemen. Current situation and future prospects. We will be following the same pattern that we did yesterday. For those of you who participated with us yesterday, more than 300 of you, we were honored to have you participate in day one. And we will follow the same format today. We will have two keynote speakers speaking for about 15 minutes each. And then we will have a short 15-minute Q&A session with both. Your questions are, of course, welcome. You may send your questions interim through the Q&A mechanism at the bottom of your Zoom page. Please indicate your name, if possible, your affiliation, and who would you like to address your question to. And we had a great day yesterday. We had, of course, keynote speakers, U.S. Special Envoy for Yemen, Timothy Lenderking, and we had Mohammed Al-Amrani from the Director of the Technical Office for Consultations and member of the government negotiating team representing the Republic of Yemen. We will be doing two similar speakers this morning, and I will introduce them and just wanted everybody to know that translation is available. And if you would like translation from Arabic to English, please click on the interpretation button at the bottom of the page and choose English. If you want reverse, the Arabic is actually represented by the word Spanish because there is no Arabic word in the Zoom mechanism. So Spanish is Arabic if you would like to hear what the guest is saying or the speakers are saying in Arabic. With that said, let me go ahead and proceed by introducing our keynote speakers today and get the program going. The first speaker, we're delighted to have Mu'in Shraim, a good friend from previous incarnations. And he is the deputy of the special envoy of the UN Secretary General for Yemen, Hans Grundberg, who was originally supposed to participate today. Previously, Mr. Shraim, by the way, served as Director of Political Affairs at the UN Support Mission in Libya. So he's dealt with two key conflicts in the region that all of us sponsoring this event are interested in. Before I give the microphone to Mr. Shraim, let me say that again, remind you that this is a joint effort. It's essentially a partnership between the Center for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies in Doha, directed by Dr. Sultan Barakat, who's with us today, and also Deep Root Consulting, headed by Rafat Al-Akhali, who is also with us on the screen at this time. And I want to take this opportunity to thank both organizations on behalf of Arab Center Washington, D.C. For the great partnership we've had on this event, as we've done in past events, and we look forward to working together in the future. With that said, let's go ahead again to our first keynote speaker of the day, Mu'in Shraim from the United Nations Office of the Special Envoy on Yemen. Mu'in, you have 15 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Khalil, and shukran, Rafat, Dr. Sultan.
Thank you, Khalil. Thank you, Dr. Sultan and Rafat, for your invitation for me to participate in this conference. First of all, I would like to apologize on behalf of the UN Special Envoy. He was unable to participate because he was busy with the monthly briefing to the UN Security Council regarding Yemen. And I also agree with you that this conference comes at a very dire and important time for the Yemeni conflict. With this conflict going into its 8th year, this remains one of the most complicated crises, as well as one of the largest humanitarian crises in Yemen. The continued crisis has led to social, economic, and political impacts that have been very destructive to Yemenis, to civil society, and to the different institutions in the civil society. The lengthy conflict has also led to a clear change and transformation, the dynamics and form of the conflict, which requires paying attention to these changes and developments if we want more inclusive and sustainable solutions. Despite this, there is a clear reality that the parties to the conflict must not forget, that Yemen cannot be governed just by one political side or party, no matter how militarily powerful they are. Relying on a military victory will only lead to more destruction and instability in Yemen, with deteriorating living conditions and fragmented institutions. The quicker that the parties to the conflict reach a political settlement or get involved in the political process, this will make it easier to reach a settlement that takes into account the interests of the local actors, of Yemenis, and the regional actors. Unfortunately, the situation is going in the opposite direction. With the escalation in the past year, the situation has been the worst it has been in years in Yemen. In this regards, I would like to share the efforts of the UN Special Envoy and his office in dealing with this complicated issue and this complicated file since the new UN Special Envoy started working in September. The UN Special Envoy is currently working on 2 tracks. The first is he is trying to work on reaching an agreement between the parties to the conflict for a national ceasefire, in addition to efforts to make it easier for people to travel, as well as for the transportation of goods within the country, by opening Sana'a Airport and also lifting limitations on Hodeidah Port. Secondly, he is working on inclusive and comprehensive consultations with a broad range of Yemenis and different segments of Yemeni society to achieve real change towards a comprehensive settlement to the conflict. This framework that the UN Special Envoy hopes to achieve in the coming few months after ending the consultations will lead to a multi-track process through which all Yemenis can discuss and find solutions for their security, economic, and political interests and priorities in the long and short term. There is important links between the 2 tracks. So dealing with de-escalation and dealing with economic and political issues are things that are urgent, and these things cannot be postponed through a long and lengthy and complicated political process. We cannot wait. A comprehensive and inclusive ceasefire, for it to be applicable, needs to have also a political process that leads to a comprehensive settlement. For that reason, the UN Special Envoy is working on both of these tracks in parallel. With regards to the first track of efforts, the UN Special Envoy has worked with the parties to the conflict to reach immediate de-escalation, reaching until a total ceasefire is reached. There were different positions of the parties. AnsarAllah had the conditions of lifting the limitations on Hodeidah Port and opening Sana'a Airport. but these things are things that should be dealt with before the ceasefire. Whereas the government of Yemen believes that opening ports and airports and implementing a nationwide ceasefire needs to be a part of a single bundle of measures that need to be dealt with at the same time. And this is why the UN Special Envoy continues to work with the two sides to try to find answers and settlements for these problems and find a solution that is applicable for all sides. With regards to the efforts in the second track, the UN Special Envoy, since being appointed, has worked with different Yemeni stakeholders and has presented his idea for a multi-track process and having structural consultations with them in the near future. These efforts primarily aim to reach a framework that helps move from a fragmented approach to the peace process to a more comprehensive and inclusive process, starting with the three tracks that support each other: political, military, and economic tracks. This approach will enable the Office of the UN Special Envoy to respond to the differing dynamics on the ground, meaning that all of the parties to the conflict will not respond to mediation at the same time or in the same time period. So this strategy allows making advances on some issues without hindering others, while at the same time having a strategic cohesion for all of these efforts. This method of using the three tracks will allow working on different levels and in different speeds to try to remain as flexible as possible and take advantage of any opportunities for progress in any of the tracks without waiting for advances or progress in the other tracks as much as possible. This type of approach helps ensure that the process is not held hostage by a lack of progress in one specific area and helps ensure that these tracks move forward. But obviously, by their nature, there needs to be coordination and organization between these various tracks to find solutions across the board. This strategy is done for two reasons. First of all, working for urgent short-term, mid-term, and long-term issues is very important before these processes take place. Meeting these urgent needs with coming up with through more sustainable resolutions is important. And secondly, is also important to recognize that the Yemeni context has a number of important stakeholders, which is why it is important to have a creative and innovative way to include more stakeholders and ensure that their voices are heard through the participation of different groups like Yemeni women, by creating a consensus of opinions regarding the desired results. Third, there's an urgent need to overcome the preconditions that are put forth and for the parties to not participate in the political process for any reason. The framework will also include a broad vision for what a final settlement for the conflict in Yemen will look like. It will also present guiding principles for a settlement that was supported by a broad range of Yemeni stakeholders. A clear objective of the organized the consultations that we will start to work on, starting with the Yemeni political parties, is to try to test and enrich the guiding principles, the visions for a settlement, and also come up with ideas regarding the agenda for the negotiations of the three different tracks. Based on the ideas and opinions that we presented during these consultations will also address issues relating to the design of the peace process and the options that are available for a comprehensive political settlement. The consultations that the UN Special Envoy has conducted has included larger or broader groups of Yemeni society and of stakeholders, ensuring that they are more inclusive. The consultations will include the political parties, will include civil society organizations. The consultations will also include representatives of different economic and military groups, of women's networks and organizations, and others. These consultations, when started, will also help build momentum for the political process. At the end of the day, or the final objective of this working towards this general framework after the consultations are ended, the parties will be invited to hold direct negotiations on these three tracks. And launching this general framework will be an opportunity to mobilize regional international support for the political process and to help this process gain momentum, to show clearly that there is a clear vision for what the solution would look like, and that this solution has regional, international, and UN support that is clearly expressed, which will help start to implement this general framework. This is briefly the efforts, brief on the efforts of the UN Special Envoy and his efforts to resume the political process, very clearly built upon having a broad range of opinions included in voices and mobilizing Yemeni regional international support for the political process in order to reach a sustainable and comprehensive solution for this long-lasting crisis in Yemen. Thank you very much. I think that was less than 15 minutes, but my presentation is over. Thank you.
شكرا سيد شريم على
Thank you, Mr. Shreem, for your speech.
Being on time and giving us actually 3 minutes extras to proceed. So I appreciate that. Before we proceed, just wanted to check to make sure the technicalities have been overcome with our next keynote speakers. Is Mr. Abdul Malik Al-Ejri available?
نعم موجود بس الميكروفون صامت إذا أمكن بس تبعد
الآن جيد.
Can you hear me now?
ممتاز سامعك.
يلا.
Okay, our next speakers, as you witnessed yesterday and today, we're attempting to give a platform to all four kind of key parties dealing with this conflict, and we've listened to three that gives us essentially the fourth party that is a key principal stakeholder in this conflict. So our next keynote speaker is Abdul Malik Al-Ejri, who is عضو المكتب السياسي لأنصار الله.
And he is a member of the political
bureau for AnsarAllah and member of the national negotiation delegation. A lot has been said about the role of AnsarAllah in this conflict, and in an academic open conference of this sort, we welcome the opportunity to hear directly from Abdul Malik and representing AnsarAllah. The microphone is yours, sir. Go ahead. تفضل.
كم الوقت المتاح؟
How much time do we have? 15 minutes. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this activity at the Center for Humanitarian and Conflict and Humanitarian Studies, and for giving us this platform, as well as the other participants in this conference, starting with Mr. Ma'in Shreem, the Deputy UN Special Envoy to Yemen. I would like to start by reiterating a very important point, and that is our support and our participation in the work and the efforts of the UN Special Envoy to try to reach a political settlement for the conflict in Yemen. And we have had a stable and permanent position towards peace. This is not a tactic. These are not just changing or dynamic positions. Our position has been static, that the only solution is a political one, and that there cannot be a military solution. This is the only option that we have to end the war on Yemen. And whether we reach this belief today or tomorrow, in a month or in a year, we will at the end of the day have to deal with this as the only option. But I would like to draw your attention to that the peace that we want is a peace that ends all forms of violence, whether they are direct or indirect, whether they are implicit or explicit. We want to end both the airstrikes as well as the economic tools of war that are used, which are sometimes much worse. Like we've said with the Special Envoy, and Mr. Ma'in knows this, we have always insisted that this kind of unseen aspect of the Yemeni crisis, which is the siege that Yemen is under and the humanitarian crisis, needs to become a priority, because the victims of these tools are dying by the dozens every single day due to the siege on Yemen, due to the lack of medical supplies and equipment, due to the ports being closed, due to the lack of medical supplies in hospitals. Dozens of people are dying every day and no one sees it. People hear about the war, they hear about the victims of the war, those who are falling in the front lines or those who are killed by airstrikes, but they do not hear about the victims or the casualties every single day because of the economic siege and blockade. We want to draw the attention of the rest of the war that this is the more vicious and more brutal aspect of the war, because it is a form of collective punishment. Any peace that does not start with ending this crisis of the Yemeni people will not be a real peace and will not be sustainable. If a ceasefire needs to hold and for us to work on dealing with other issues while you are still implementing this form, what is still considered an international law collective punishment, then this will not build any trust or confidence. And I want to clarify why this is our position by focusing on the humanitarian file. Mr. Ma'in knows that at the end of 2019, in the beginning of 2020, there were discussions of what was called at the time the Joint Declaration. And it had the three most important issues relating to a comprehensive ceasefire, the humanitarian arrangements, and economic arrangements. We had continued meetings in order to reach a draft that all of the parties could agree to on these issues, in addition to mentioning or reiterating commitment to the political process after implementing these two parts. But at the time, we were surprised to find that the aggression after the escalation in Jof and Marib was escalating in the economic war by stopping the importing of fuel. This was in 2019 and 2020. This led to a severe fuel crisis and only increased the blockade. The more steps we would take towards peace, we were surprised to find very harsh punishments that would impact first and foremost the Yemeni people. And this is why we had a disagreement with the United Nations with regards to the arrangement or the order of the issues, because they were different from one time to another. During the time of the negotiations over the Joint Declaration, like Mu'in said, we tried to not complicate the political process, that it would be kept for a second stage after the de-escalation process, whether through a total ceasefire or through the humanitarian and economic arrangements. We were working on this matter, but we were surprised, even though there was a siege from before, but fuel would be imported through Hodeidah in addition to grains and other other things were not allowed to be imported, and also all exports through Hodeidah port were not allowed. Sana'a airport has been closed since after the Kuwait talks, and even patients or people with chronic illnesses, students, are not allowed to travel through Sana'a airport. And this has had a huge impact on the Yemeni people. In addition to the sanctions against the Yemeni people, like moving the central bank, the non-payment of salaries, the UN has failed, and the parties to the conflict have failed in reaching an agreement with regards to these problems, and there was intransigence in actually reaching a solution. We noticed that these kinds of collective punishments that would have a harsh impact on Yemeni civilians were used as a way to pressure or to try to use them as bargaining chips during the negotiations. And this is something that we completely refused, and we have expressed this rejection repeatedly. We have said that these are issues, the issues relating to the import of fuel and with regards to opening Sana'a airport, are things that cannot be imposed even during war. Based on international humanitarian law, these services cannot be stopped. No one can impose a complete blockade that leads to a famine or leads to collective punishment for a people as a whole. International humanitarian law and the Geneva Conventions and the laws on international conflicts and local conflicts all prohibit the use of these instruments. And using this as a way to pressure us during negotiations was something that we rejected. We never rejected resuming negotiations for a ceasefire, but we said that we must, for us to become involved in these talks, we need to work on the humanitarian and economic issues. For them to impose further collective punishments, we want to go back to where we were in the Joint Declaration, that these collective punishments that are meant to pressure us or meant to force us to reach a specific political settlement or specific resolution during the negotiations need to be lifted. The whole world knows this. Humanitarian organizations show this clearly in their reports. The worst humanitarian crisis in the world is in Yemen now. The UN Development Program's report shows that the victims of the economic blockade and the closure of the airport are many times more than those who are casualties of the military operations. But no one sees these. You only see the bloodshed. You only see the people being killed on the front line. This is something that is painful that we want to end as soon as possible. But we also believe that any peace that does not start from the priorities of the Yemeni people will not be successful. And a good example of this is the GCC initiative. The GCC initiative only focused on the political aspects of the conflict, and it only focused on the demands and interests of the political elites while leaving behind all of the interests of the Yemeni people, and this is why they have failed. This is the result of focusing on the elites. When you neglect the basic needs of the people and you do not make it a priority for you to deal with, then we will not be able to reach a solution or even have a form of de-escalation. The crisis will remain and will only continue to grow if its root causes are not dealt with. We have not made any arbitrary preconditions with regards to the humanitarian file. All of the impact of this humanitarian crisis will affect the Yemeni people more than anyone else. All of the different segments. It will not only affect AnsarAllah's supporters or the Sana'a government. It's true that the national authority and in Sana'a, most of the population is under the control or the authority of the Salvation Government, more than 20 million Yemenis. And this is something that the aggression is using to try to pressure us. They're trying to use these punishments and this economic blockade and these economic measures to try to ensure that there is no popular support for the government in Sana'a. This will fail. This shows that there are no serious attempts to move towards peace.
So we say that this is a rightful demand, and the other steps should be the following. Concerning the ceasefire as well as concerning the political process, we emphasize that any permanent solution cannot happen. Even the ceasefire cannot happen, and these arrangements cannot happen unless the political parties have an understanding about a political solution in order to end the war and to have durable peace. Other than that, it's not possible, because there are some urgent needs. As Mr. Mu'in indicated, there are needs to lift the blockade and to open the seaport and the airport and to de-escalate in order not to be related to the complexities of the political file. So, and this, the humanitarian arrangement should be followed by a ceasefire. The humanitarian demands are simple: opening the airport and the seaport. These are simple things, and the beneficiaries at the end will be the Yemeni citizens. And then after that, we can have negotiations on de-escalation, military de-escalation. We have presented an initiative concerning Marib, and the last week, we have also presented some initiatives concerning the humanitarian and economic arrangements as a paper for discussion in order to confirm our seriousness concerning that. But we feel that there is a will to have peace that is just de-escalation with the continuation of the strangling economic sanctions, and to keep these sanctions as a leverage until a political settlement is reached. We cannot guarantee when the political settlement can be reached. It could be a year or 2 years from now. Since 2015, we have been demanding a political framework, and they were refusing that. In the Kuwait talks, we raised these two files, the political file and the military file. We said that they should be one package. And at that time, we were close to reach a deal, and it was a golden opportunity. They'll not be compensated, but they have missed it because they have required that the military arrangements are implemented first, and that we withdraw from Sana'a and we hand over our weapons. And after we are disarmed, then they can have political consultations, but we will be under their mercy then. And this was not acceptable to us, and it was putting the cart before the horse. Despite that, they have missed that opportunity. And in the Stockholm discussions, we exercise pressure in order to have a political framework that establishes the key political principles in order for every party to guarantee their position in the future. And they refused that. Mr. Mu'in knows that the statements of the other party were all about that they have come to negotiate on one thing only, and the Hudaydah agreement was reached by behest from Saudi Arabia and MBS, Mohammed bin Salman. So they have missed these opportunities, and they are escaping discussing any political framework because they consider that any political framework will put an end to their legitimacy. We understand that this legitimacy is just an international demand. It is a way in order to address the concerns of Saudi Arabia. And this is something that complicates the talks. If I have time, I can discuss some of these complexities and the thorny issues that will complicate any successful talks in the future. So at this moment, we are interested in the following: the humanitarian file. This is a file that is priority for us, and the world is saying that it is a priority. People are saying globally that there is a humanitarian catastrophe in Yemen and that there is a need to lift the restrictions and to provide humanitarian aid to the Yemeni people. The Yemeni people, some of them commit suicide now because of the suffering, the humanitarian suffering. There are more than 20 people under the control of AnsarAllah Authority, and they have no economic resources. For example, yesterday and today, they tried to destroy the infrastructure for the telecommunications because it is providing revenues. It's nothing in comparison to the needs of 20 million people. And for the fuel products, for example, the revenues are between $5 to $7 million per month. And we were saying to the special envoys, the US and the UN special envoys, if we are negotiating for all revenues in the country, it is worth it. We were negotiating for the taxes on fuel products, and this is nothing. It's $5 or $7 million a month. It's nothing in comparison to the needs and the requirements of 20 million people. And now they want to destroy the other revenue or source of revenue, which is the telecommunications, and they want to inflict maximum damages in order to stop this stream of revenues. And this way is known to us, and it was done by the United States before. They want to move war from the military aspect to the economic aspect, and we will not allow that. We will not allow the continued killing of the Yemeni people economically with the economic blockade. Dozens of people die every day, and no one sees them. We want the world to hear their suffering and their voices. You still have 1 minute. So these are the key points. There are many things that I wanted to raise. We do hope that this file, which is the humanitarian file, and it is very important, we wanted to be taken care of. This is the gateway for confidence building, and then we can move to the comprehensive ceasefire in Yemen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Al-Ejri. And we, as announced, we would like to spend the next 15 minutes in the art of conversation. We welcome your questions. We have already received probably enough questions for another day of discussion, but we'll go ahead and try to answer as many as possible. I would like to invite both keynote speakers to be brief in their answers so that we can accommodate as many questions from the audience as possible. After the Q&A, we will be taking a 10-minute break, and then we will resume our program with two panels like we did yesterday, panel 3 and panel 4, which will conclude our deliberations for the day. The first question today comes from a colleague, Abdul Al-Qassab, Arab Center, Washington. سؤالي يتعلق بميناء الحديدة الذي كان عدم السيطرة عليه.
My question is about the Hudaydah seaport, and the control of the seaport was one key driver for the conflict. The UN Special Envoy representative, doesn't he think that the Hudaydah seaport should be part of the comprehensive solution?
Regarding the Hudaydah port, and it's addressed to Mr. Shraim, asking if the UN considers that a lifting the siege on the port is part and parcel of the comprehensive solution that he referred to.
يعني باختصار شديد يعني إذا لاحظت في الكلمة اللي
In brief, as I have already indicated, our efforts or endeavors in the short term are related to humanitarian measures and economic measures. And the humanitarian measures include the free mobility and movement for people and goods by reopening the Sana'a airport for travelers, or through lifting the restrictions on the Hodeidah seaport for fuel ships and other ships to dock in the seaport. And there is a verification and inspection mechanism under the United Nations to verify the imports to the Hodeidah seaport and to ensure compliance with the relevant UN Security Council resolutions. There's no disagreement that there should be a package related to humanitarian and economic measures that is associated with clear measures and clear sequence in order to de-escalate and have a comprehensive ceasefire. I believe this package, if we can have it with the commitment of the parties to resume the political process as soon as possible, because as we have indicated, these measures cannot succeed without a political process that brings different parties into the table to have a durable solution. So we believe that, yes, there is a dire humanitarian situation and it has to be addressed, but also the ceasefire issues are very important and they are also humanitarian. And there should be clear commitment from the parties that these things will be part of the agreement.
عبد الملك هل ما زلت معنا؟
مرحبا.
ايه اوكي. هناك سؤال حول نفس هذا الموضوع موجه.
There is a question concerning this topic and it is directed to you.
العبسي باسم يقول أن الميليشيات
Al-Absi says that Houthi militia refused the reopening of Sana'a airport and refused all initiatives to reopen the airport and to alleviate the suffering of the people in order to use the airport as a military base. You have partially responded to these accusations. How do you respond to this question in particular?
Or AnsarAllah that they have refused to reopen the airport in Sana'a and other gestures, basically to use it for their own military kind of objectives. How do you answer that, please? تفضل عبد الملك.
كأن قرار إغلاق مطار صنعاء.
Well, as if it is the decision of closing the Sana'a airport is in our hands. Those who control the skies of Yemen are the coalition states. Those who permit the aircrafts to land the coalition is the coalition and the coalition states, and it is a decision by the coalition to open the seaport and the airport. It does not even require an approval from our side. How can we refuse the reopening of the airport? I don't understand that. When they say that we refuse the opening of the seaport, for example, how do we refuse that? There are ships that come and they receive permits from the UNIVM and they are stranded at sea and they do not allow them to dock in the seaport. So how can we grasp that? It's not in our hands. This is a very strange question. It is as if we are the ones who close the airport. This is a misguided question. It has to be directed to those who close the airport. It's not in our hands to open or close the airport. I think this question should be addressed to the coalition. Shema Ramzi, PR manager in SIAC organization, is asking Mr. Mu'in, under the dire humanitarian consequences resulting from the stopping the military solution against the Houthis, your perspective to the solution in Yemen, is it soundly based, especially given the future steps that you have talked about in your remarks?
Whether the plans that he referred to that the UN is embarking on are basically difficult to implement based on some of these recent developments and mistakes made in the past and their repercussions. Mr. Shreem, please. Microphone.
يعني هناك زي ما حكيت هناك خطين متوازيين.
Well, as I indicated, there are two parallel tracks. We are working on issues that we believe should be addressed very quickly, and they include the humanitarian and economic measures and ceasefire in Yemen, nationwide ceasefire. And at the same time, this track should be connected to a commitment to launch a comprehensive political process. We think that the consultations that we will embark with the representatives of different parties in Yemen in order to frame an idea or a concept for the solution. These consultations can create a platform or a forum for Yemenis to start a serious conversation. But all this relies on the political commitment from the different actors to reach some short-term solutions concerning ceasefire, humanitarian and economic measures, and a commitment towards a political process that ends with a political partnership and clear steps for the peaceful transition of power and a transitional phase and the future of the solution in Yemen. So these are the issues on our agenda, and therefore I believe that these are realistic solutions, but it does not mean they are easy. And therefore, there should be understanding by the parties that the military solution is not, the solution. And if they reach this conviction, then we are halfway.
We have a question from the same person. It's kind of related to this, and it's addressed to the other speaker, Abdul Malik Al-Ejri. Essentially, dealing with the refugees. أليس حفظ أمن النازحين في مأرب وغيرها هو جانب إنساني؟
Protecting the IDPs in Marib, isn't it a humanitarian thing? The IDPs were targeted with shells and hostilities. If the humanitarian file is a priority for you, why do you escalate? And do your group, or does your group bet on exercising pressure on the coalition and you embark on more hostilities? How do you respond to that? I do not understand the question, actually. I don't know what they mean. Do you bet on international pressure on the coalition to stop what you do militarily, despite your confirmations that the solution is a political one, not a military one? So in order to stop the military actions, it seems that there are steps from your side. These steps from your side, do they aim at creating more international pressure on the coalition? You mean the strikes against UAE and Saudi Arabia? Do they mean that? Internally, yes, and externally. Well, for these attacks, because it's a war, and in a war, we don't currently do not have any peace efforts, and this is the law of war. For every action, there is a reaction. If you want us to take a step, they have to take a similar step. If they question why we attack United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, or we attack inside Yemen, well, because it's a war and all parties are fighting, and this is something given. And this is ABC of the political solution. And there is no escalation from our side. And I really don't understand the word escalation. For the attacks that we launch, there is no balance of power. There is a clear difference in terms of armament, and the air bombardment is coming from the side of the coalition. We have very humble capacities. We do whatever possible for us because we are defending. We are defending with all means that we have.
Sayyid Shuraim, we have a question from Iyana Vasecha. Thank you for your presentation. Could you please say a couple of words regarding the vision of the UN about the possible solutions for the issue of power sharing in Yemen, considering the number of political stakeholders here? Previously, power struggle between political groups or bi-political groups, Southerners, Houthis, Hadi government, and others, partly block the transition process efforts. So I suppose it's an essential issue that Yemen and the international community should address. How do we proceed, especially with your forthcoming plans that you referred to in your presentation?
شكرا. يعني أعتقد إنه سؤال مهم
I think it's a very important question, and this question has to be on the table of the discussions between the Yemenis themselves. The United Nations does not have a recipe or a panacea for power sharing between the different parties, but it is one of the objectives of the talks before the negotiations. These talks aim at exploring the issues that should be on the table of the negotiations, meaning that in the political issues, there are things related to the transitional period, the political participation, elections, the constitution, all these things that should be on the agenda. So we believe that the political participation should be expanded in order to include new parties to the political process. For example, the Riyadh Agreement created a political partnership between or inserted new political parties through the STC and the Yemeni government. And therefore, the political participation cannot be restricted to or confined to certain parties and exclude others, because the excluded parties will become spoilers and obstructors. But how this will be done, this political partnership, on what basis it will be built? Is there a shared political vision for the different parties that brings together Yemenis around the transitional period, around the political solution? If there is an agreement on that, I believe the issue of the political participation will follow that, will ensue. But the conflict usually does not end by sharing power between the conflicting parties only. And therefore, for the situation in Yemen, we have to give due attention to the local forces which power amplified recently, and they must have a role in the process, and their voices should be heard in the political process and in the design of the political process. Their voices should be heard, including different local forces and constituencies.
شكرا معين. هناك عدة أسئلة.
Thank you, Mu'in. We have a number of questions to Mr. Abdul Malik. Because of the lack of time, I will combine two questions and 1 minute for every answer because of the lack of time. The first question, why there is no women representation in the negotiations, and why the role of women is marginalized in the negotiations from your side? And the second question, why haven't you signed the Kuwait agreement?
Microphone. أيوة تفضل.
بالنسبة للتمثيل النسائي نحن
For the women representation, since the NDC, we had women representation in all stations. We had representation even when Sana'a airport was open. We had women representation in our delegation. But recently, it's very difficult because the airport is closed, and there are concerns and fears concerning travel, and the closure of the airport created hardships. As you understand, the nature of the Yemeni society, women cannot travel by land. It is quite risky, and the airport is closed, and if they leave the country, they may not go back, and therefore this created an issue with the women representation. We do not object to the principle, and we emphasize on this participation since the days of the NDC. The second question was about the Kuwait agreement. Well, the Kuwait, we did not have an agreement in Kuwait. It failed. The talks failed. We requested a comprehensive political and military solution, and to have one package, and to have an implementation mechanism similar to the GCC implementation mechanism, and to start with the military arrangements followed by the political arrangements. But we requested to agree on a comprehensive roadmap covering the military security and political aspects, and then we implement according to a clear time frame. But this demand was refused because the other party insisted to address the military aspects, and for the military aspects, they wanted us to retreat from Sana'a, to withdraw from Sana'a, and to lay down our weapons as a precondition. We said this is very difficult because they were putting the cart before the horse, and therefore the Kuwait talks failed without an agreement. It was a golden opportunity because we were closer to peace then, and the political and the economic situation in Yemen was much better in terms of the humanitarian aspects and the destruction and all these things. There was a great opportunity, but some parties had expectations that they can resolve it militarily. Thank you very much.
For the Q&A, unfortunately, we have probably another 30 questions left that we can't accommodate. We apologize to all of those who sent questions. I hope some of these will be addressed in the next two panels. At this point, I'd like to express my gratitude and collective thanks to both keynote speakers, Mr. Ma'in Shuraim and Abdul Malik Al-Ejri, for their contribution, their frank assessment of the situation, and taking time out of their busy schedules to be with us today. We will take now a 5-minute break and to save some time, and we'll try to start on time within 5 minutes with panel 3 and panel 4. Panel 3 will be dealing with reactivating the peace process, lessons learned, and pathways forward. And I see some questions related to that, so I hope they can be addressed in this panel. We'll take a short break after that, and then the last panel of the day would be the future of Yemen, recovery, reconstruction, and development. And I also see some questions pertaining to that. I hope you will raise them again during that panel. So please stay put, 5-minute break if you need it, and then we will be resuming soon with panel 3 that will be moderated by my colleague, Dr. Imad Harb, Director of Research and Analysis at the Arab Center in Washington, D.C. Thank you for your participation, and please stay put for the rest of the program.
Thank you.